Dr. Big Ed here. In the middle of the night, wide awake, wife's asleep. You know what's keeping me awake? Power supplies. Power supplies. You have to really seriously consider power supplies for your pedal and what they do, what you need, what they achieve for you. Why? I'll use a little example from this week. So I got this Dr. No Moon Canyon pedal, right? It's drive, delay, reverb, and loop, effect loop in it. Amazing pedal. But I'm sitting there recording with it, so eager to get into it, dialed up my tones, and I'm like, wow, this thing's really, really good. But I noticed at the end of like the second song, there's this hiss going on. And I'm like, what's that about? So I'm like, oh, it must be something in my signal chain, must be messed up. You know, usually it's cables or power supplies. But the way I was taught by the engineering legend Bob Olson is you start with the beginning, the simplest, start with your cables, backtrack from there. So took about 2 hours, but went through my entire signal chain. I thought it was, finally at the end, I thought it was the simplifier, amp, simulator box. Wasn't that. Thought it was that for a little while there at the end, but it wasn't. I'm like, what the fuck? Finally, the last thing I do, I don't even know why I did this. It was bizarre, but I started turning off, there's 4 switches on the Dr. No. Drive, reverb, loop, and delay. Started turning them off one at a time. First 3, drive, reverb, loop, nothing. As soon as I turn the delay off, the hiss goes away. So immediately I think it's the Dr. No pedal because I just got it. Oh, there's something wrong with it. I write to them. They're in the Netherlands. Anyway, long story short, it takes them about 24 hours to get back. So I'm sitting there, I'm like watching TV and I'm thinking about it and I'm like, wait a minute. All right, so it needs 400 milliamps of power, 9-volt power. And I was pretty positive it was getting 400 milliamps because it was sharing on the Ciox or CHOX, as we will discuss that power supply in a minute. You can split. They have split cables, and as long as you've got enough milliamperes. And I was just using it with a splitter, little mini splitter box, which allegedly used less than 100 milliamperes, much less, I think. Anyway, it obviously wasn't, but I plugged the one spot in. So I said, wait a second, okay, so maybe it's not getting enough milliamperes. That was the issue. So I plugged the one spot wall wart unit by itself, and the hiss was still there. And I'm like, well, I know that's 1,000 milliamperes. Here's what you gotta have. You gotta have isolated, you gotta have regulated, and you gotta have stabilized. That's what you need for your power supplies, to have totally clean, totally noiseless, totally pain-free power. So, long story short, one of the great things about the CHOX or Ciox for you Americans pedal power supplies is, it's got other jacks. So I just take one 500 milliampere by itself, plug it into the Dr. No, and it's gone. So wrote to him, said, don't worry about it. got it. And they're like, yeah. Now, I don't want to poo-poo the One Spot because people have been using the One Spot for years, and for non-digital based low milliamp pedals, you can even daisy chain them. You know, like overdrives, fuzz, not all fuzzes, but fuzzes and compressors and whatever. You can get away with that. Can't get away with that with every type of pedal, especially a lot of modern pedals. Okay, so first, Chox, okay? Danish company, in my opinion, the pinnacle of the industry. And here's why. Isolated, regulated, stabilized. You can run multiple pedals off of outputs. In this case, Dr. No, I had obviously exceeded the 500 milliampere, even though I thought I hadn't, and probably the pedal that was sharing with the Dr. No Moon Canyon was misrepresenting its milliampere pull. But Chox, you can, if you have a 500, so I use the DC, well, actually I have a few different Chox. I have the Atom, the Big John, but lately I've got 3 DC7s. And on the DC7, you have 7 outputs. Now they can be 9 volt, they can be 12 volt, they can be 18 volt, switchable. If you have pedals that, again, add up to less than 500 milliamperes, you can split them. They still get the 9 volts, and they will all of them on that output, that outlet, will have isolated, regulated, stabilized power. Awesome. I am not kidding you, because Chox sells split cables, so they sell single cables, split cables, triple cables, so you can have 3 pedals on one jack as long as they don't exceed the milliamperes. You can double voltage, you can make a 212 volt become a 24 volt for your like deluxe memory man. They have a plethora of cable combinations, and I have run 14 pedals off of one Chox DC7. Right now I'm running 10 off of one DC7, but I think I've got an extra output that I'm not using, so that means I'm only using 6 to power 10, and that's because one particular pedal takes 12 volts by itself, so that's one right there. So the other 10 are on 5, and 2 of those are 500 milliampere pedals themselves. The Zoom MS50G is on its own, so that's a single, right? So when I say I got 10, I've got the Zoya, the Empress Zoya is on one, so that's one by itself. The Zoom MS50G needs 500, that's on one by itself. So 2 of the 5 I'm using are taken up by single pedals. So that means 3 outputs are powering the other 8 pedals. Pretty cool. So Chox, you will not go wrong. They're rarely discounted, but there's a reason they're awesome. Highly recommended. All of them, but especially, as you know, the DC7 also super thin. It'll go under a pedal train. Yep. Amazing. So, highly recommended. Another one I can highly, highly recommend, and they are the best customer support ever, are the True Tone people who make the One Spot. So again, the One Spot gets maligned because, oh, well, you daisy chain and blah, 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 and it's not isolated and regulated. Yeah, okay, great. But for years and years and years, That was many people's first power chain, okay? But they make the CS6, the CX7, the CS12. They're all super duper fantastic, will not give you noise. Yes, they're a little thicker. I think they've got a new one. Is it the CS6 is the thinner one? But I've owned the 7 and the 12. Got them over there. Running boards perfectly well. And they've got multiple, excuse me, options. It is the middle of the night. They've got multiple options for power as well, switchable. They also sell awesome cables. For example, so on their power supplies, there's two 18-volt on, like the CS12 has two 18-volt at the end. Well, but they sell a cable that will down sample, you know what I mean, the from 18 volt to 9 volt. So if you need two more 9 volt, you just get those two cables from them. They also sell splitter cables because, again, like the chocks, you can, as long as you're not exceeding the milliamps. So in the past, I was using my CS12, and I was like, oh man, if I just had one more output. And I was having a chat with the guy from True Tone, and he's like, just split it as long as you're not exceeding the milliamps. I'm like, oh, you guys do that too? He's like, yeah, of course. And we sell a splitter cable. I got a bunch of them. You know why? Because that splitter cable that they sell works on every other power supply cable, right? Because Strymon, everybody uses basically, Chocks doesn't, they use that RCA plug. But everybody else, I mean, Voodoo Labs, whoever, they all use the same connection. So at the other end, you can split it. And as long as you're not exceeding the milliamperes, you're good. So big thumbs up. Here's another tip that I got from the guys at True Tone. Again, awesome people. Several years ago, I had something go wrong with a product. They were like, don't worry about it, send it in, we'll replace it. I'm like, yeah, but no, just don't worry about it. No questions asked. Didn't have to send the product back to them ultimately. They just sent me a new one. And this has happened on a few occasions where I've needed customer support from them. So anyway, back to, there's another great tip that I got from the guys at True Tone. So you've got, I don't know, 400 milliamperes, 250, couple of 500, and the unit itself, if you're not exceeding, say the unit, I think it's 2,500 or something, it's probably more than that, but let's just, for argument's sake, say it's 2,500 milliamps total, right? If you're not exceeding that for the entire unit, it distributes it, right? So you could, as long as you do your math, if you have a 150 milliampere pedal on the 100 jack, but you're not exceeding the total for the unit itself, it will distribute it, and you'll probably be covered. Another awesome thing. So big thumbs up to True Tone. And last but not least, I'm not going to get into every power supply. I've tried them all. But the last one I want to talk about is Strymon. I have had a couple Strymons. I've used them. They're awesome. They're awesome. They're quiet. They're awesome. However, I have one issue with them, and I've discussed this with them, and they know what it is. They said they were going to deal with it, but this was like last year, and I haven't heard anything more about it. Certain pedals, like my Red Panda Particle 2, doesn't like the ramp up of their power supply ramps up. And the Red Panda Particle 2 doesn't like it. All my Moore mini pedals don't like it. It's something to do with the digital switching and the ramping. So be forewarned, I've had at least 4, maybe 5 pedals not work properly with the Strymon. It's great power supply, no other issues other than that. It's quiet. A lot of my friends use it, but be aware that you could have some issues. And they said they were going to fix it. Maybe the new ones will have it. I heard nothing back, but I have nothing against them otherwise. Seriously, I still use it, but I just can't use certain pedals. So that is something to keep in mind. So, isolated, regulated, stabilized. Make sure those three things. Make sure the pedals you're going to be using can be powered by the power supply that you wish to use. If you have any questions, let the doctor know. Doctor know. I'm a Bond fan anyway. And I'll see you next time, all right? Thanks.